beautiful day. Do you have days like this every day?
Pretty much.
But you don't live here.
I'm vicariously imagining.
And we say happy Sabbath to
Yes.
everyone.
Happy Sabbath.
First day of
Shalom.
Isn't it meant to be Happy New Year?
Happy New Year. That was, from a civil point of view, that would be Feast of Trumpets, wouldn't it? Yes, that is the civil New Year. Yes, so we're a little bit past that now.
But the religious ones.
Yeah, the religious one is in April, March, April. So, well, I thought we could we do that song again, Gary? Or you haven't got...
We got lots.
We'd have-
I
we'd
got
have to
18 different songs. You want to do the same one again? Well, it's because it's the Sabbath.
Because it's the Sabbath.
Okay.
Can we do that one? Do you need much work to set it up?
Well, just change the plug. Oh.
HDMI.
Well,
Connector.
you work
They
on...
locked up the thing over there.
Well, you work on that.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, do you want a call?
Is it that connector
And-
there? Is the connector which he's got?
The power.
There you go, Gary.
Gary is
So, Laurel, we could sing a song for you. How does that sound? I think you've met my wife, Laurel.
Yes, I've been trying to remember. There's, I'll practice. Gertie, Henry,
Anne-Marie.
Anna Marie, Amanda, I know Sharon, and Elizabeth. Penny,
Henny, good.
Zadie, Melanie, Jules, Gracie.
She's getting my disease.
Forgetting the people I know. Eileen, Cedric, Lydia, Daniel,
And?
Romilda, and Etienne.
Well done.
And Bob.
And Adrian.
Bob. And Chris.
Oh, and Chris. And Gary.
Way in the back.
Yes, that's Etienne. Oh, actually. There we go.
Well, I've been wanting to bring my wife to visit you here in Oudtshoorn for some time. So I'm glad that Laurel and Daniel can be here, and thought we'd bring some of our American friends as well. So glad we can spend this time together.
We are so blessed to be here.
Mm. We'd like to sing a song. You are my hiding place. You always fill my heart with songs of deliverance. Whenever I am afraid, I will trust in you. I will trust in you. Let the weak say I am strong in the strength of the Lord. You are my hiding place. You always fill my heart with songs of deliverance. Whenever I am afraid, I will trust in you. I will trust in you. Let the weak say I am strong in the strength of the Lord. I will trust in you. It's one of our favourite songs. All right. Do you want to set that up and... How many songs have you written now, Gary? Scripture songs? 180? You can have your own book of Psalms now.
Yep.
It's only 150 in the in the book of Psalms.
Let's see.
not on it.
Nice.
There it
There
is.
we go.
I'll have to look them up.
Aha. Yeah. Okay. Where's mine? Okay, I was gonna do that one, but we'll do this one. I don't know what the volume is. It need to be up higher so we can hear it here.
Oh, that's very interesting.
All right, it'll take you one time through to get the
We'll
hang
do
of
it
this.
twice. If thou turn away thy foot
From the Sabbath, from doing
thy
pleasure on my holy day,
and call
the Sabbath a delight. Holy of the Lord, honorable,
and shall
honor him,
not
doing thine own ways,
nor
finding thine own pleasure,
nor
speaking thine own words. Then shalt thou delight thyself in the Lord. Cause to ride upon the high places of the earth, fill thee with the heritage of Jacob thy father. For the mouth of the Lord, the mouth of the Lord, the mouth of the Lord has spoken it. I'm still getting it wrong. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Here we go.
All right, try again.
If thou turn away thy foot from the Sabbath, from doing thy pleasure on my holy day, and call
The Sabbath a delight. Holy of the Lord, honorable, and shall honor him, not doing thine own ways, nor finding thine own pleasure, nor speaking thine own words. Then shalt thou delight thyself in the Lord. And I will cause thee ride upon the high places of the earth, and feed thee with the heritage of Jacob thy father. For the mouth of the Lord, the mouth of the Lord, the mouth of the Lord has spoken. That's pretty tough timing there. More.
Okay.
More. All right. Well, it's wonderful to be with you all again. Nice to be back in Oudtshoorn. I was just thinking of a text as we were singing, and I think most of you will know it. It says, "And you shall know the truth, and the will set you free."
Make you free.
Make you free.
Set you free, make you free.
Hmm.
Chimozi.
Okay. So
Same, same.
it'll make you free. And where does that freedom take place? Your heart and your mind, free from anxiety, from fear, from anger, from frustration, from irritation. This is what the gospel will do for people. To give you peace. They will keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on thee. The Prince of Peace. So this is the theme that I want to share. I I must say that as last year when we were here and we were sharing some things, there were some new things that we were sharing. Some things were hard to be understood. But as I've continued to journey in my understanding of the gospel, the freedom grows more and more. And I have a number of things that I'd like to share with you today and over the next few evenings, if you're able to come. That has just given me tremendous joy, tremendous freedom in the gospel. And I would like to start in the sanctuary because Psalm 77:13 says, "Thy way, O God, is where? In the sanctuary." So I'd like to spend a bit of time there. But before I do that, I'd like to kneel. For those who can. Father, we give you honor and praise and glory. We worship your holy name as we come into your presence as your children. We thank you for the protection of your angels that watched over us as we all travelled here. And we welcome the feast that you have called us to. You have called us to the feast. And the feast is of your Spirit. And we pray for that Spirit. Blessed are they that hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Be with us as we fellowship together and as we open the Word of God together, that you would teach us and that you would help us. And I thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Before we go to the sanctuary, there's a text in 1 Corinthians chapter 2 that is also something that I want to focus on in this presentation. It says, "For I am determined to know nothing among you save Christ and him crucified." The crucifixion of Christ. And I'd like you to turn your Bibles to a text that has puzzled many people, if they're honest. John chapter 3. John chapter 3. Not verse 16, that we understand that fairly clearly. But just before this, we see that it says in verse 14, "And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up." And what is Jesus referring to here? Well, Jesus on the cross, but he says, "As Moses lifted up the serpent." What story is this talking about?
In the wilderness.
In the wilderness?
The serpents were all around.
So the serpents were all around Israel and God was protecting them from the serpents? And then what happened?
He told him to make a serpent out of bread.
But what happened? The serpents were all around, and what did the people do to allow the serpents to come in?
They started murmuring.
Murmuring and complaining. So they were murmuring and complaining, and so that allowed that spirit of contention, that spirit of discontent, it allowed the serpents to come in and to bite them. So God tells Moses to make a serpent of brass. Isn't that just a little bit weird? Just, these serpents are biting them, and so they are to make an image of the thing that is biting them and hang it on a pole, and by looking up to the pole and looking at the serpent and believing that they can have forgiveness, they would be healed. I mean, that's utterly ridiculous.
In our understanding.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Why would you make an image of the very thing that is destroying you? And by looking to the thing that is destroying you and believing, you can be healed. There's a whole lot of problems with this story. One of the problems with this story is that if you read the Torah carefully, when you commit a sin, if you want forgiveness of sin, what did you have to do? You have to ask the Lord to forgive you, but what did you have to do in the book of Leviticus?
Sacrifice.
You had to do a sacrifice. If you want forgiveness of sin, you must offer a sacrifice. But they weren't offering any sacrifices here. They were just looking at this serpent, a symbol of that which was destroying them, and looking upon this serpent and believing that they would have help. They were forgiven and they were healed. No sacrifices. It's a bit strange, isn't it?
Was Christ the sacrifice? Did God?
And so we see, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. And I want to spend some time, if you are willing to follow through, because many questions are raised here for me personally as to what this means. And I just want to leave that there in your mind saying, what does this really mean? Why is Jesus being compared to a serpent?
Because he takes our sin.
He takes the sin.
He was made to be sin.
Made to be sin for us who knew no sin. So he's taking something upon himself. He's made in the likeness of a serpent. And why was the serpent made out of brass? That's what we want to look at. So let's go into the sanctuary.
I have an interesting parallel. Day of Atonement, he becomes a goat.
He becomes a goat. There's an interesting...
Not a lamb.
That's right, we're going to do that, and then I'll do the larger... This pen is not...
And dry it out.
It's a little bit dry. So, when you walk into the sanctuary, what is the first article of furniture that you see? So, into the courtyard. The altar. The altar of sacrifice. What is this altar made out of? Well said. In Australia we say brass, but it's... but brass. Bronze. Now, in the Afrikaans, what is it? It actually says something different, I think.
That's, you call it brass.
It is bronze in the Afrikaans. Okay, in the German it says copper. Copper or brass? What's the difference between brass and copper?
Zinc.
Brass is an alloy of copper and zinc. Okay?
It's not pure copper.
No, it's not pure copper. It's an alloy. It has a mixture added to it. And then we have the washing, the laver. And what was this made out of? Bronze. Brass again.
Or brass.
Oh, nice. But it was not only made out of just brass, it was a particular type of brass that it was made out of. Exodus 38:8. Can we look that up? Exodus 38:8. What type? It was a particular element that it was made from. Mirrors.
Yeah, looking glass.
The looking glasses or the mirrors of the
Women.
ladies. So this laver is made from objects that women would use to look at what? Their own face. It's very interesting. When you look down into the water with the brass, what would you see? What would you see in the water? Your reflection. So the laver is to allow you to see yourself that you might be cleansed. There's a principle here. But the metals we are focusing on here is that in the courtyard, the metal that is being used is brass. And the metals are important. Now when we go into the sanctuary, we have the table of showbread. We have the altar of incense. We have the candlestick. Now what are these three items made of? These are gold, aren't they? This is pure gold, made out of beaten gold, the candlesticks. This is overlaid, acacia wood, overlaid with gold. But the metals being used in here are all gold. This is important. Why the difference? In the most holy place we have the Ark of the Covenant, and it is acacia wood, which represents the humanity, human nature, overlaid with gold. So the metal,
The mercy seat is solid.
the mercy seat is solid gold. This is all gold. The boards, all these boards around the sanctuary, what are they made of?
Oh, well, gold, yeah.
They're gold?
Sockets.
But the sockets
Or silver.
are silver. So we've got gold and silver for all of the boards around. Okay, so everything within the sanctuary is made of gold. Now there was an inner lining of curtains, and those curtains were woven together with gold thread. But the outer layer that you could see from outside of the sanctuary, the outer layer was woven together with brass thread. Interesting. Inner layer is gold, outer layer is brass. Does that mean something? When you're looking from the outside,
You see yourself.
you see brass. There's nothing to be desired here. But from the inside, everything is gold and silver. Now, what is the significance of the difference of the metals? This is what I want to look at. Come to Genesis and we'll see who is the one who developed brass. Where does brass come from? Genesis chapter 4 and verse 22. It says, and Zillah, she also bare Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. So he is the one that developed brass. So who is Tubal-Cain? What descendant, whose descendant is he from?
Cain.
He's from Cain. So this is a man-made metal from a son of Cain. What is that doing in the sanctuary? This is an interesting question, isn't it? A man-made metal from someone who was not a follower or had apostatized with his father, was not a follower of the true God, had developed this metal. Why is this in a sanctuary? The other thing of interest is, can you dig gold and silver out of the ground?
It's in a rock.
Yes.
Yes.
You can. It's in the ground and you can dig it out.
Gold veins.
It needs to be refined and everything like that to get impurities, but gold is something that God created. Silver is something that God created. Brass is something that man created. It's not made by God. Something that man made. And not only was it a man, it was not a godly man who made it, it was an ungodly man who made it. Interesting. Interesting. So,
So that's on the outside.
in the courtyard, we are seeing things that are man-made. In here, we're seeing things that are God-made, that God has made. Now, when we look in the book of Proverbs, I'm trying to think, is it in Proverbs 25? I can't remember the verse off the top of my head. It says, a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver, or pitchers of silver. So the word of the Lord also says the word of the Lord is like pure silver, doesn't it? Or it's tried in the furnace.
Verse 11.
Verse 11, what does it say? Apples of gold?
A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold and pictures of silver.
Okay. Very good.
What chapter?
So, the Spirit of Prophecy tells us that the tree of life is made of pure, transparent gold. And that the fruit of the tree of life is gold mixed with silver. Interesting. So, the brass is very interesting. How do we understand the brass? Let's have a look at how the Bible talks about brass. Deuteronomy 28 is the chapter for the blessings and the curses. The blessings and the curses. In the first half, if you keep my statutes and my judgments and all these things, I will bless you, I will bless you.
Up until verse 15.
Up until verse 15. Exactly.
After that.
After that, it's all downhill. Now, after verse 15, we come to verse 23. And what does it say? If you break my commandments and my statutes and my judgments, then verse 23, and thy heaven that is over thy head shall be brass. And the earth under thy feet shall be iron. Very interesting. So when you're breaking God's commandments, the heavens are like brass. What does that mean, the heavens are like brass?
They will be handled by people. Man-made.
It's a man-made. You are looking to the heavens and you are thinking that you are connecting with God, but what you are seeing is man-made. It's not God-made.
That's why the weather is controlled.
Well, yes. It's very interesting that when Elihu in the book of Job described how God made the heavens, have a look at Job 38. Job 38. 37 rather, 18. Hast thou with him spread out the sky, which is strong as a molten looking glass, or a bronze mirror? I think it's Elihu in 37. Is that he's in 37? Yes. Elihu's understanding that God spread out the heavens like a brass mirror. Interesting. Another thing that's interesting too is, I'm just looking for the verse that speaks about Egypt. I just need to find it for you. There's an interesting reference to Egypt connected to iron. How that God brought Israel out of Egypt, and he makes reference to iron. And just looking for there it is, Deuteronomy 4:20. Deuteronomy 4:20. This is important because God brings out here represents the world, and God brought the people out of Egypt, and He gave them His sanctuary. So He's bringing them out of Egypt, and it says in Deuteronomy 4:20, "But the Lord thy God hath taken you and brought you forth." What does this represent? The altar. What is it pointing forward to?
Sacrifice.
The sacrifice of. So it represents the cross, does not?
Crucified with Christ.
Crucified with Christ. Now, this is a challenging thought. Most people would suggest that the cross of Christ should be considered to be pure gold. Why is it made of brass? Why does that symbol, which represents the cross of Christ, why is it made of brass and not gold?
Because he becomes sin for me.
He became sin.
He becomes sin. He was actually guilty for not, for actually not, he shouldn't be guilty, but he became guilty for sin. Because we are sin.
Yeah, because we are sin.
Took our shoulders.
He became a human being. The price of our salvation was the death of Christ, wasn't it? The question is, who required this? Who required the death of Christ? It's
Skin for skin.
He himself.
Well, the people did because they put them on there.
when Satan took the human race captive, he kidnapped the human race. God paid the ransom. Who sets the ransom price?
The captor.
The captor.
Right.
The captor, the kidnapper, sets the ransom price.
I'll give them back for a price.
And there's a syndrome that when people are kidnapped or taken hostage by a kidnapper, I think they call it Stockholm Syndrome. You heard of that? The kidnapped person takes on the personality and spirit of the kidnapper. Because they don't want to die, and so they agree with everything that the kidnapper says, and they believe everything the kidnapper says, and they are so afraid that they begin to think exactly like the kidnapper. And so the human race began to think exactly like the kidnapper.
God of this world has blinded the minds.
Blinded the minds,
of them that believe not.
so that humanity thinks that the only way to be forgiven is for someone to die. This is the only way we can believe we can be forgiven. It's not God who demanded death in order for us to be forgiven. It was Satan who demanded death. This is where it gets very interesting, and that's why the brass it's calling out to us to think that this is man-made, inspired by Satan. God pays the ransom price that we think is necessary for forgiveness to take place. It demonstrates God's incredible love because he was willing to pay the ransom price. He was willing to give up his son for us, but God never set the ransom price. God never demanded death. God is not the God of death. He's the God of life. And the brass is telling us, I did not set the ransom price, but I paid it. This is your idea. This is a man-made idea, inspired by Satan, by the captor,
Brass serpent.
the brass serpent.
And Jesus offered himself.
He offered himself. So Jesus, do you see, Jesus, and we'll go more into this, by becoming a serpent, he is saying, I am paying your price. By becoming a serpent, he is paying the serpent's price. And then we can be set free. And we, who are slaves of the serpent, who believe the serpent, that someone has to die in order for God to forgive us, we then can believe in the forgiveness of God. But God did not require this. Now, let's look at some text, and we need to spend a bit of time because this really opens up some interesting thoughts. Thy way is in the sanctuary. Now, Psalms 40 verse 6.
We got to sing the scripture song. When we finish here, we got to sing the scripture.
You'll sing the scripture song. Psalm 40 verse 6. What does it say? Sacrifice and offering.
Sacrifice and offering, thou hast not my
Okay. So, sacrifice and offering, that is not desire. Was it God's desire For something to die?
No.
No. God didn't want the sacrifices and the offerings. Notice what it says. Burnt offering and sin offering thou hast not required. How is this possible? Anyone who's read the book of Exodus or Leviticus, you'll see all the commandments of God for how to do the sacrifices and offerings.
If you're gonna do sacrifices, here's how it should be done.
Right.
That's different than you must.
Sorry? Gary's saying, well, if you are going to do sacrifices, this is how you're going to do it. Okay, that's an interesting point. But I was raised with the belief that God was the one that says you must do sacrifices. And this is what is pointing to the death of my son, and this is what is required for you to have forgiveness of sins. When my son dies on your behalf, then my justice is satisfied, and then I will forgive you.
Father, my blood, please forgive them.
Please forgive them, Father. Turn your wrath away. Please no more be angry with this people. I've paid the debt. Are you familiar with that idea?
Well, when human beings fell, no one wanted to take responsibility for that fall. So God said, I will take responsibility. He took it. He took the responsibility.
He took the responsibility.
And that's
Let's unpack that a little bit. Let's
that's
go
the
there.
story.
Genesis chapter 3. We need to go there, Elizabeth. So, Genesis chapter 3. It's a good place to go. Verse 9. And the Lord called unto Adam, verse 9, and said unto him, Where art thou? Did God not know where Adam was? He knew where he was.
Where's your mind?
Where are you? What are you thinking? That's what he's asking him. Verse 10, and he said, I heard thy voice in the garden, and I was afraid. Why was Adam afraid? Because of sin? What did he think that God was going to do?
In the day that you shall eat thereof, you
Kill him.
shall
Surely die.
Did God say that he would kill him if he ate of the fruit of the tree?
No.
Results.
What did God actually tell him?
You will surely die.
In the day you eat,
You'll be separated from me, the source of life,
In the day you.
which is death.
you will perish. You will die. He didn't say he would kill him. He said, but if you eat of the fruit of this tree. Now what would lead someone to eat of the fruit of a tree that God says, look, I've given you all of this garden, I've made all of these beautiful things for you, and all of this will bless you and you'll be wonderful, but just don't touch this tree. The only reason you would touch that tree and want to eat from that tree is because why? Hmm?
Lust of the eyes.
Oh, lust of the eyes? Well, yes.
Because you listen to your woman.
Hearken unto the voice of the woman.
And the woman hearkened unto the voice of the serpent.
Okay, I can sense atonement here. All right?
Because you didn't trust the person who said that.
Because you don't trust the person who said it. That's why you do it. The only reason you would eat the fruit of that tree, who has given you everything and has only shown you love, the only reason you would eat of that tree is because you have entertained doubts about your Creator. And to take of the fruit and to eat it is to seal your doubts in absolute unbelief. It is a belief that God does not have your best interest at heart. You need to go outside of His protection, outside of His blessing to receive that you think will bring you blessing and fulfillment. So what the tree represents is distrust of God and a belief that He does not truly love you, because if He truly loved you, He would let you eat of this tree as well.
Well said.
So that's what that tree represents. So for Adam to eat of the fruit of that tree, he had to have an idea about God, that God did not truly love him. And that is what the separation is. And once you separate from God, the life giver, you are going to die. You're going to forfeit your life, not because God is going to kill you, but you're going to pull, like if you had an electric cord coming out of the wall and you pull the cord out of the wall, you're going to die. There's no more life in you. This is it. But Satan said to Adam through Eve, you will not surely die. So Satan says to Adam and Eve, you're not going to die. Eating the fruit of this tree is not going to harm you. So in believing this, what does that do to God's statement, in the day you eat thereof, you shall surely die?
Also says that you will become like God.
You shall become like gods, knowing good and evil. But Adam knows that God is a powerful person. And if he believes that I'm not going to die from eating from this tree, how then am I going to die? How's he going to die? God says you're going to die.
So he thinks that it's God's going to kill him.
God's going to do it. That's why he's afraid. That's why he's running away. Because he says, well, the fruit's not going to kill me. So who is going to kill me? It has to be God. Because he said, in the day you eat thereof, you will die. So he thinks that God is going to kill him.
He already doesn't trust him.
He doesn't trust him. He's afraid of him. He doesn't believe in him. And so because he doesn't trust him, he thinks God is going to kill me. Now, when God comes to him and he's afraid, he's terrorized. He's in absolute terror. And God asks him. And he says, in verse 11, he says, and he said, who told thee that thou wast naked? He didn't say, how did you know you were naked? He said, who told you? Who told him? Hmm?
I don't know. I think the snake is only when he...
Satan. Satan.
Accuser.
After Satan tempts them to break the commandments, to break God's commandment, as soon as they eat, he turns around and says, God's going to get you. He's going to kill you. He's trying to break further and further. He's trying to break the relationship between Adam and Eve and God. God will kill you. So he's suggesting this. Who told you this? Who told you that you were naked? Notice Adam's answer. He says, did you eat of the tree whereof I commanded thee thou should not eat?
The Lord knew what he did. Anyway, he was testing him.
So, did you eat from the tree? What options, what available answers do you have there?
Yes or no?
That's right.
Was God in a position to question him like this?
Yes.
Yes, he made him. Did you eat of the tree? Yes or no? What should have Adam's answer been?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. What should he have done next?
Apologize.
I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Why didn't he do this?
He was afraid of him.
He didn't think he could.
He didn't think he needed to.
He blamed his wife. He blamed Eve. He
Okay.
didn't take responsibility for himself, for the sin that he committed.
Oh, but just hang on a minute there. He was ready to give up everything for this woman, wasn't he?
Yeah.
That's what he told her.
Yeah, that's what he told her, but he didn't.
But when he gets the first test he gets, we have a saying in Australia. He threw her under the bus. You have that saying here? Threw her under the bus. But that's pretty bad, isn't it? So Adam thinks God is coming to kill him. And when he says, did you eat of the fruit of the tree that I commanded you not to eat? He said, the woman. So what is he actually doing to his wife?
Blaming her.
Hmm?
Blaming
Offering
her.
her as a sacrifice.
He's offering her as a sacrifice
In his
Yeah,
place.
yeah.
on his behalf, isn't he?
Uh,
Do you understand why we have marriage troubles today? To think that the man would do this to his wife. He would offer her up, saying, well, okay, if you need to kill someone, kill her.
His second self. She came out of him.
She
Part of
came
him-
from him.
Part of himself.
He didn't take any responsibility for it. He blamed the woman, whom he allowed to separate from himself. He should have said, oh, look, I shouldn't have let you, it's my fault. I let this happen, it's my responsibility. What if Adam had have done this? Even in his false understanding, okay, Lord, you need to kill someone? Take me. It's my responsibility. Let her go free. Don't kill her, because I love her. You kill me instead.
Sounds like Moses.
That's what Moses did, didn't he? Blot me out of the book. If you have to kill, if someone has to die, let it be me. That's pretty good for a human being. It's very good.
Song of Moses and the Lamb.
But why didn't Adam do this?
He's a God.
He was his own God. He had been filled with self. And he was filled with the idea that the only way that atonement can be made was for somebody to die.
Somebody else.
Somebody else on his behalf. Someone instead of him. This is where the sacrificial system came from. Satan taught him this.
Evolution, survival of the fittest.
Survival of the fittest. Got a survivor. Survivor. You got to survive. Others have to die in order that you might live.
But you know, when the angels, when a portion of them left, and then a portion of those came back, there was no death required for God
Okay.
to forgive them.
That's a whole story in itself.
It is.
Are you familiar with that story? Should we? Maybe we'll come back to that one.
Right.
There's a bit involved in that study. So, just staying in this picture, so we see that in the heart of Adam, he says the woman. But he didn't stop there, did he? The woman whom
Thou gavest me.
you.
Let God as well.
And all communication between heaven and earth is through who?
Christ.
Through Christ. So Christ is the one who comes to Adam, and Adam points the finger at Christ. If someone's going to die, it's going to be you. You did this. You made this woman to tempt me. You deserve to die, not me. It's not my fault. And so Christ was slain from the foundation of the world. In the mind of Adam. In his mind, he had enmity towards Christ. He blamed him for the whole situation that he had caused. And he was happy for his wife to die and for Christ to die so that he could live. This is the Stockholm Syndrome. Adam has taken on the mind of Satan. It was Satan's plan. This was Satan's plan to kill Christ. To come up with this idea of sacrificial atonement, that somebody should take the place or somebody was responsible for my own wrong actions. Because it says in John 8:44, you are of your father the devil, for he was what?
A murderer.
A murderer from when?
The beginning.
The beginning. And also what? A liar. He lied and he murdered in his mind. He wanted to kill Christ, and so he developed this system of sacrificial atonement, penal substitution, that someone would take the place and that way he could kill Christ.
It's interesting, the same person who first murdered, he created the brass.
Cain.
Cain.
Good point. In his line comes a man who makes brass from the man who first killed. So we see this same principle. Cain has a problem. He's not following God's commands. Okay? How does Cain solve his problem? Does he ask God for forgiveness?
Get rid of it.
he kills his brother Abel, and then he has atonement. Then everything is fine again.
Be God.
Not.
It didn't fix the problem, did it?
No.
So we see this same problem occurring. This is really, really important. But the Spirit of Prophecy tells us that God instituted the sacrificial system. So why did God institute the sacrificial system? Because he wanted animals to die?
No, he loves his creatures. They're innocent.
And this is a really important principle about how God works. And I want to carefully go through this text, and hopefully we can see how the Torah works.
Isn't that because he wanted to show us what Jesus had to go through for us? That we understand what has.
That's true. But think about this brass here, a brass mirror to show us what?
Ourselves.
To show us ourselves.
Yes.
God had to show Adam what was in him. If God had have said through his son, Adam, you are seeking to kill me, what would Adam say? Yes. All I did was eat a piece of fruit, and now you're saying I'm trying to kill you. Are you crazy? Do you have a demon? Isn't what they said when Jesus came? Who says we're going about to kill you? You have a demon. We're not trying to kill you.
Just planning.
We're just planning it. So the sacrificial system is part of the brass mirror to show man what is in his heart. This is what is inside of you. When you said, the woman whom you gave to be with me, in your heart is murder towards me. And this is what you are wanting to do to me. And so God institutes the sacrificial system for Adam's benefit to see himself. So that when man is offering the animal, he is acknowledging, this is what I am doing to the Son of God. I am murdering him. I acknowledge my guilt. But man in his perversity turned the sacrificial system around and says, oh, this is what God wants. Okay, I kill the animal. You happy now? I've done it. You want animals? I'll give you animals. In fact, I'll give you my children. I'll kill my children. Are you happy now? That's why Abraham went through that test, didn't it? Take now thy son, thine only son, and offer him on a mountain that I will show you. And some people say, why would God command this? Because of the brass mirror. He is showing what is inside of Abraham by his nature, his natural inclination coming out of Babylon, where they would sacrifice things in order to have atonement. He had to show him what was inside of himself and say, Abraham, this still exists inside of you. A desire to sacrifice that which is most precious to you in order to appease me. Do you see? And many people read the Bible and say, God commanded Abraham to kill his own son. Boy, phew.
Some people say he commanded them and then he stopped them, but he still commanded them. So, that's
Yeah.
the problem.
Yeah.
And that shows our thinking too, because even in the scriptures it never says God said to kill him. It says offer him up as consecrated.
Offer him up. Didn't say kill your son, it says offer him up.
We're like, oh, we know what that means.
Yes.
Interesting, isn't it? Interesting, these things. Now, I've gone through this, I haven't got any copies with me, but cross-examined and cross-encountered. I've gone through a lot of this, what we're talking about here, in this booklet, in order to rethink how we're looking at the cross, how we are understanding what the cross actually is, and who required it, and why did it have to come. Because the truth is that the Bible says, without the shedding of blood,
There's no remission of sin.
Read that quote. The cross is of our dull senses.
yes, we're going to go there. We're going to go there. Without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sin. Why? I used to think that without the shedding of blood, God would not forgive sin. That was my understanding. It doesn't say that. It just simply says, without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sin, because our first father, Adam, determined this, inspired by Satan. When he offered his wife as an atonement for his sin, saying, you can kill her instead of me, and you can die too, because you were the one that did this, this was stamped into our nature. Adam stamped into human nature sacrificial atonement. It became part of us. It's our natural inclination to think this way. And so God, in meeting us, he comes out of his temple, and the court represents the earth, doesn't it? He meets us on the earth on our own terms, with a man-made system. And he satisfies the demands that we have established in order to redeem our minds from believing that God will not forgive us.
Is that the enmity?
What we are talking about here is really very different from what Christianity teaches. Let me give you a few more examples. Now, when God brought Israel out of Egypt, we're going to have a bit of a look at this. Didn't he instruct them? Didn't he give them detailed instructions about all the sacrifices and offerings? And they had to offer animals every day. Every day, morning and evening, and on the Sabbath twice as much. Do you know, on the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles, they had to offer 13 bullocks, 14 rams, and heaps. Just all these animals had to die. Today is one of the highest sacrificial days. It is the highest sacrificial day of any day of the year. More animals die on this day, and each day the bullocks go down. 12. A lot of animals die during the Feast of Tabernacles. So, my understanding was, well, okay, well, God requires this. But when I read Jeremiah chapter 7, have a look at Jeremiah chapter 7. You get one of these moments where you go, how do I understand this? What is this saying to me? Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 22. We're at 21. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, put your burnt offerings unto your sacrifices and eat flesh. And then he says, for I spake not unto your fathers, nor commanded them in the day that I brought them out of the land of Egypt concerning burnt offerings and sacrifices. Have you ever read that before? When you came out of Egypt, I didn't command you about burnt offerings and sacrifices. I'm like, but I've read Exodus and I've read Leviticus and I'm pretty sure you did, Lord.
After they started sacrificing
Oh.
the golden calf.
Oh, that's very interesting, isn't it?
It was after.
Did you all hear that? The sacrifices began to multiply after they offered a sacrifice to the golden calf. Now, it's quite interesting. I don't know how many of you have seen Cecil B. DeMille's depiction of the Ten Commandments. And they made the golden calf, and what did they put between the legs of the golden calf, if you've ever seen the story? Who was placed up there? Dathan comes out in the story, and he grabs a young woman and says, here is your sacrifice. Altar, and they sacrifice her. But isn't that just an echo of what Adam did to Eve? Why were they doing this? Even if the movie is completely wrong, it's bringing out a principle, isn't it? A principle that they are offering a young virgin.
Oh, that's what happened with Jesus. His whole thing happened on the 25th of December.
Okay.
He slaughtered a lady on that day, which was
Who was that?
a virgin.
Who did that again?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Esau.
Oh, Esau. Yeah. Esau.
Yeah,
I hadn't heard that.
yeah.
25th of December.
In the history books written about the city which he created, what was I start?
Talking about Nimrod.
Yeah, yes sir.
Nimrod or Esau?
Yes sir, yes sir.
Esau. That's new information for me.
Yeah. On the 25th of December,
Okay.
when the sun comes up between the two obelisks, he used to slaughter a lady which was a virgin on that day.
Okay. I'll be interested to see the history. I know that Tammuz, the son of Semiramis, was born on December 25th. Yep.
That shows us that it's a long going on thing going on.
Interesting, isn't it?
He was gored by the boar.
Gored by the
40
boar.
days before Passover.
Okay.
Easter.
Easter. Yeah. Yeah. So, how are we going? How are we going for time? We probably should have a break. We can come back to some more of this, but I just wanted to lay some groundwork for where we're going to go. And the point that I want you to think about is brass in the Torah is presented as something that is man-made. It's not presented as something that's good. It's presented as dross of silver and gold. And this is why, and I want to finish on this text at this particular point, after 1844, God's people are instructed to do something with the sanctuary, and it's in Revelation chapter 11. And what does it say?
Measure.
We're to measure the sanctuary. What does it say?
Leave out the courtyard.
Give me a reed like unto a rod. And the angel stood saying, Rise and measure the temple, Revelation 11:1, and the altar of incense, and them that dwell therein. But the court, which is without the temple, leave out and measure it not. After 1844, a message would come that would allow the dross of brass
Throw it out.
to be thrown out. There would be nothing of brass left. Only gold and silver would be left. No more brass. But in throwing out the brass, you are throwing out the symbol of the cross, aren't you? But here is the symbolism that God wanted to give to Moses. Because Moses was commanded once to strike the rock. After that, and I mentioned this in this book, at this altar the rock is struck. At this altar the rock is spoken to. It was prayer. It's the altar of incense, of prayer. We speak to our mediator who stands before God. We speak to him. We don't need to strike the rock anymore, because once the ransom price has been satisfied and our minds are released from this false justice system, from this false understanding, and we purge out the brass, to ask for forgiveness, we only need to ask. We don't need to kill anything.
He is more willing to give.
He's more willing to give than we are to ask. But in order for us to get to here, we had to go through this. The rock had to be struck. Christ had to suffer, because we could not conceive of forgiveness of sin unless somebody died, because our first father Adam set our minds in this direction. But once that was satisfied, the brass could be purged out, and we can simply ask for forgiveness. Just like those people who were bitten with the serpent, they didn't have to sacrifice any animals. They only had to look and believe in the forgiveness of God, and they were healed. No sacrifice required. Interesting, isn't it?
Being born again, we're restored back to what we should have been.
Yeah, restored back.
That's man's way.
Man's ways are the brass.
God's ways.
God's ways, gold and silver. Very interesting, isn't it?
That's why sacrifice and oblations have been cancelled since the Christ has been crucified.
Very interesting, isn't it?
Yes.
He will cause sacrifice and oblation to cease. Daniel 9:27. We want to unpack that too.
That means when the commands were given back with all of the ceremonies that went with the feast, and wherever there was a sacrifice, that represents prayer for us now. So does that mean on each, you have more prayer on a new moon than a Sabbath, and you have more prayer on a, you know.
That's a good point, isn't it?
And
You speak to the rock rather than strike the rock.
The most communion with God
And
in
sing.
prayer would be.
That's why he said to the lady,
Yes. Sorry, what was that last part?
Like the most, because it goes up in numbers of,
Yes.
of animals that they sacrifice.
More prayer, more praise, more worship.
So tabernacles would be the highest point of prayer and.
Yeah.
all that.
Yeah, absolutely. Morning and evening becomes prayer, not killing animals.
Interesting, Deuteronomy 8, verse 9. Just quickly read it.
Numbers.
Deuteronomy
Deuteronomy.
8, verse 9. There you find the iron and the brass.
Yes.
And then you find in verse 13 the silver and the gold. So it's also going from outside in as the blessings with Deuteronomy 8 came in.
Yes. A land wherein thou shalt eat bread without scarceness, thou shalt not lack anything in the land, whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills thou mayest dig brass. Now that
Yes,
translation is actually copper, because you can't dig brass out of the hills. You can only dig copper. But
Verse 13.
But then verse 13, and when the herds and thy flocks multiply, and thy silver and thy gold is multiplied, and all thou hast is multiplied.
Starting to come in.
So looking at these metals in the Torah is very important because they tell us something. And
that's why when Jesus was crucified, he wanted to show them to the tabernacle in heaven. They must forget about what happened here. And I think the problem is,
yes,
that's why he said to the lady who's caught with the
neither
men,
in this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you
Yeah.
worship the Father.
Yeah.
That's right.
He said to the lady, go and sin no more.
Yes. He didn't say go and offer a lamb.
No.
But this was a total prophecy.
Okay.
Daniel 2, 7, it was a total prophecy of the whole history, which we know it, this whole
This whole system.
system was a prophecy.
So we see how that humanity steadily, through Babylon, Medo, Persia, Greece and Rome, it is heading in this direction.
So we are now, with the iron, if you see the sockets of the outer court, it was iron. And there was 10 curtains, and the 10 toes, we are there.
There's no iron in the sanctuary that I haven't.
The sockets,
No, they were brass.
the outer court.
The outer court, they're brass. I don't think they're iron, unless I checked it. I'm pretty sure it's brass.
Oh, yeah, those are.
Here is silver,
Yes, those are.
but these are brass. Iron is outside. It's in the world. Okay? So I think that's in Exodus 20 something, 25 to 28 in there. But I did check to see if there was any iron in the sanctuary. I didn't find any. But iron is outside. It's the iron furnace. And it's interesting that Nebuchadnezzar wanted to throw Daniel and the three wise men into the furnace.
Yeah.
So, but the key point here is the brass is something that is man-made. And therefore the whole concept of the cross is something that God is satisfying, that man needs satisfaction, that he has imagined with Satan's help, but God never desired it. Now, in the next presentation we might go a little bit deeper of what happened when God first made the commandments. He cut them out with his own hand, didn't he?
Yeah, in the rock.
He made them himself and he wrote on them himself and he gave them to Moses. What did Moses do with that after they sinned with the golden calf? He broke them. Did God make another set?
Yes.
No.
Moses said,
Moses had to make it
Oh, he just wrote them.
with human hands and God wrote on it, which means it was a combination of what God was doing and what man was doing. The symbolism of this is very important. There's still a man-made element in the Ten Commandments because it was cut out with hands. The stone that strikes the image is not cut out with hands. It's cut out without hands. And this is a really important point in terms of how the whole law works and how the whole law operates and why God gave commandments and statutes that a man cannot live in. I gave you statutes that were not good. How can God give us anything that's not good? But that's what the Bible says in Ezekiel. And we need to look at these things and unpack them. But we just conclude with the brass, and to get us to think, wow, the cross is actually not what I thought it was. Something different.
Interesting thing is, on the 22nd of October, it was Day of Atonement in 1844.
Yes.
So where did the church start? Where will Christ actually wanted this church to start?
The most holy place. To come out of the wilderness.
This First Chronicles 29 verse 7 gives us all the material in the temple. Okay? And there you
So this
can
is
see-
Solomon's temple?
Yes.
Yep.
And there you can see it is listed 100,000 talents of iron. So there was quite a lot of iron in the system.
But is that in the sanctuary or just in what
the
verse
temple.
is it?
That was in the temple of Solomon.
Which verse?
Verse 29, verse 7.
Verse 7.
You can see all the
And gave for the service of the house of God for the house of God of gold 5,000 talents and 10,000 drams of silver, 10,000 talents, and of brass 18,000 talents, and 100,000 talents of iron. Well, that's interesting, because in Moses' sanctuary there was no iron.
Yeah, in Exodus, I found Exodus 27, that it was brass.
It's brass.
The,
But in Solomon's sanctuary, we're seeing that iron is being introduced. That's very interesting.
Which is not good news.
That's bad news.
And what is
We're
interesting
going
is
back
you
to
go
Rome.
for 2 Chronicles 2 verse 14, you get a repetition of it. Let's read that.
2:14.
2:14, 2 Chronicles.
The son of a woman of the daughters of Dan, and his father was a man of Tyre, skillful to work in gold and silver, in brass, in iron, in stone, in timber. So he was the workman. Hiram.
Yes.
So he was working in iron, and he built the temple of God.
And in timber, in purple, and in blue, and in fine linen, and in chrism. Okay? So if you see that chrism, that is connected with the 10 curtains
Yes.
outside. So the
Okay.
10 is coming back to Daniel 2, the 10 toes.
So that's really interesting. So we're seeing a degrading of the sanctuary, and they're starting to introduce iron into the sanctuary. And it's also interesting that it says that Solomon, when they dedicated the temple, they slaughtered 120,000 lambs and 22,000 oxen.
Yep.
In one day. And God says, I didn't desire this. But this is what man is willing to do to try and appease God and to please God. Very interesting, Cedric. Iron in Solomon's temple.
So what does he tell us is going to happen?
No wonder they went to Rome, huh? The Iron Monarchy of
No
Rome.
wonder the kingdom split.
Yeah.
Already stepping down
Yeah,
from
stepping
the
down.
holiness that God wanted them to be, but you come to worldliness.
Yeah. And it's interesting that after Solomon's temple, because Solomon had in the temple 300 shields of gold. And in order to pay the taxes, Rehoboam, in order to pay the taxes to whatever persecuting power, he took out the shields of gold and he replaced them with shields of brass. That's interesting. But I want to study that a bit more now about iron in Solomon's temple. That's really interesting. Very interesting.
Joshua 6, it talks about, I don't know what the context of it is, but it says that vessels of brass and of iron, and they put them into the treasury of the house of the Lord.
Where was that?
Joshua 6.
Joshua 6.
Yes, I don't
So they're
know-
putting iron vessels in the sanctuary.
I don't know what the
in the time of
context
Joshua.
is. Yeah.
So we see the perversion, we see iron starting to come in.
Isaiah 60, verse 17 is also very interesting. Also listed.
Okay.
60. You know, this is talking about.
It's mentioning iron in the sanctuary, is it?
Just read. Isaiah 60, verse 17.
Do you want to read it? Oh, you've got it.
For brass I will bring gold. For iron I will bring silver.
Okay.
And for wood brass. And for the stones iron.
Interesting.
I will also make thy office peace. And thy executive righteousness. Interesting.
So simply by studying the metals in the Bible,
Fascinating.
we can discover some amazing things that God is telling us. And the Torah is telling us, and Ezekiel, that only gold and silver. The rest is dross. The dross of silver is brass, iron, tin, lead. This is not part of God's system.
That's why we have to go through the time of trouble.
To purify out all the brass and the iron and the tin.
He shall purify the sons of Levi. They might bring a sacrifice of righteousness.
Righteousness, not animals.
Not
From a health perspective, these are toxic heavy metals.
Brass and iron,
Copper,
lead.
copper,
lead,
lead. Yeah.
aluminum.
Nothing wrong with colloidal silver
No?
or colloidal gold. That works well in the body. And it's interesting that with brass, it's made of copper and zinc. And copper and zinc, when you take them internally, they as copper goes up, zinc goes down.
Or the
As
opposite.
copper goes down, zinc goes up.
They have to be balanced.
They're not balanced.
Like, they are
Imbalanced.
Opposite.
opposites. So brass represents two opposite principles. And what I see in the cross is God's mercy is connected to Satan's justice. They are opposite principles and they are welded together in the cross. You see that? So, all right, let's finish with prayer. Very good study. Father, we thank you for the study of the Word. We thank you for the precious metals and the other metals in the Bible that teach us your ways in the sanctuary. And we see that we are to leave out the brass and the iron, and that we are to have gold and silver. And the gold is faith, the faith of Jesus, that you may have gold tried in the fire. And the silver is the settings or the works, the good works that come from faith. Faith that works by love. May we have these elements in us, and may we see that it is not you that required the cross, but we needed it. We needed it to believe we could be forgiven because of our first father's transgression, that we believed that death must happen to satisfy transgression. And we thank you that you are opening these things to our eyes. Bless us through the rest of this day. In Jesus' name, amen.